Alright guys, so this is where we left off last, which is completing all of the 4 shots. If you open your file and you'll see that it looks something like this, right? You don't really see any of the UV wrap. Just remember you can come into render view by clicking on that and it should bring up what your scene actually looks like. Okay, with that being said, if you wanted to make any changes to lighting and camera, I would just wait until after we make a couple changes. So I'm going to go over to the compositing section here. Remember, it's these tabs up here, right? And you're going to go ahead and turn on use nodes up here. This part's going to be important because we're constantly going to change the shot that we're in. And we should actually be able to see our image. So if we haven't, let's do a quick test. So to render out what your animation is actually going to look like, I'm going to leave it about right there. I'm going to come up to render and then I'm going to hit render image. You should have a box that pops up like this. So this is what our actual animation is going to look like. So we have to make some changes and adjustments. So I'm going to close that, come back to compositing. Okay, there we go. I just moved it over to one of the keyframes. And if you all notice in that image that we rendered, it looked a little flat. And that's just because of the render engine we're using. To make it look more realistic, we jump into cycles. And unfortunately, our computers can't really handle that render engine. So we're just going to work with Eevee. We're going to make some adjustments. So we're going to turn on ambient inclusion, bloom, screen space reflections, and motion blur. Render image. And that is going to make things look 10 times better than the first one. Okay. All right, with that, you're going to hit Control Shift and left click on this node right here to pop up this right here. Okay. All right, and for once, when you zoom in, use your scroll wheel, right? You're not going to really see anything, this image zoom in or zoom out. In order to make this fit in our background here, you're going to use V, letter V as in Victor, and it should zoom out like that. And then to zoom back in, it's Alt V. But, okay, so we have our viewer node, composite, and then rendered layers. Right, and so next thing I'm going to add is a lens distortion node in between the rendered layers and the viewers. So over Shift A, I'm going to just search lens distortion, pop it in between there. Okay, and what this does is, let me show you. I'm going to change, you don't have to do this part, yes, but in this bottom part right here, the dispersion, I'm going to hit 0.5, and it creates this chromatic effect on the side. Again, don't hit 0.5 because your computer is going to work double time, but we can put something simple like 0.05, enter, and it gives us that little effect over here on the side. Okay, and for now this is only showing us here in the viewer. In order for it to actually come out when we render out, we need to connect it to the composite. So you're going to left click on the image output and connect it to the image input of the composite node. Okay, with that now done, we can go over back to layout, and this is a point in time where you make any adjustments to your materials, your camera, your lighting. If you feel like everything's perfect, you'll leave it as is. This is personal, I'm changing my camera to be 85 millimeters. And I'm going to have to make some adjustments because I changed it. So, example here and here. I'm going to have to move it closer, so I will hit pause while I adjust my camera. Okay, so once you've made any changes to materials, camera, lighting, it's good practice just to hit render, render image to see what the final product is going to look like. So something like that I'm happy with. I don't want to make any more changes, so I can close this box here. And we're going to finally go into our output settings. So I'm sorry, render settings. You come over to your properties and it looks like the back of a DSLR camera. As I said, to make life easier, when you have a good computer, you will use cycles because it will do all of the work for you, but we're going to use Eevee. We're going to make sure that ambient occlusion is turned on, bloom is turned on, screen space reflections, and motion blur. Another option that you have is if you go under color management, you can change the way the stuff looks in here if you wanted to, but for the most part, I'm sorry, under look, this is what I was looking for. You can do high contrast, low contrast. This is up to you to go ahead and play which one you like best. Just know that if you change it, you're going to have to come back over here to render image and then make sure it looks good. I actually really like high contrast, so I'm going to keep that. So this is all good. Then we're going to go over to our output properties, which is this little printer icon. This is full HD. You're going to scroll down to where it says output. And this is why it's important to keep your USB clean and organized, because by default, Blender will output to a temporary file, meaning that you can render out all these images. They'll be here for a day and then the next day they're gone. So, oh, but before I move on to that, sorry, we're going to go over to frame start and end. Okay, so I actually want this to change about, let's see, in frame 80, when it starts to curve, I actually want the background to change to white. So what I'm going to do is from frame 1 to frame, yeah, let's say 80, I'm going to render those images out. So frame start 1, frame end will be 80, 24 FPS. Now I'm going to go to output, click on this little folder icon. I've been putting everything in my USB, so where is that? Oh, you guys know what? I plugged it in before, so give me 1 sec. Sorry, I plugged in my USB after I opened Blender, so I have to change that. Alright, so folder icon, USB. I have a folder already for the drink. I'm going to create a new folder for these images, so add a new folder. This is going to be scene 1. Double click on it to open it. Drink scene 01. This is what the files are going to be named as, so I'm going to actually not even add that number. Drink scene. No, I do. This is scene 1 underscore, and then it'll number them from here. Okay, so accept. Alright, this should never be set to temp. The file format, you want to make sure you select PNG because it's going to be by image. In case it crashes, it's just easier to go back and tell Blender to start off wherever you left off. So all this looks good. You can match yours to mine. And once we're done, we're going to go back to render, hit render animation, and it's going to render out one image at a time. I'm going to hit pause on the video, and then we'll come back once it's done. Alright, so that's finished rendering out. I'm going to close this. Finally going to start the next part, but first I have to change the color of the backdrop. So I'm going to click on the backdrop, come over to materials, change the base color to white. And this is really blown out. So can we get away with this? Alright, I did a test render and I'm alright with that. So you don't have to change this last part. If you don't want to, you would just leave it black if you'd like. I'm going to change this to start from 80 to frame 85. Everything else gets saved. I'm just going to hit render, render animation. And that second half is done, so I can close this out. And before we move on to scene 2 to render that out, I'm going to go to compositing. I'm going to box select all of this here, Command C to copy it. Now we can go to shot 2, back to layout here, and I'm going to change this back to black. So select the backdrop, materials is this little button here, or you can come over to shading if you want, right? And then change the space color back to black. It's preference really at this point. And go to compositing. Oh, sorry, check on use nodes. Gotta select these, delete them, Command V to paste. We're gonna change this drop down to shot 2. Control Shift and then left click on this one. Let's go to layout. To select all. See why this isn't popping up. I'm going to do a quick test here. Render image. Okay, so it is applying that effect, and that's all I really care about, even though it's not popping up in compositing. Oh, there it is. Okay, so again, if you needed to make any changes to lighting, you totally can. For me, I'm going to fix this light here and make sure it follows the cans, but that is completely optional for you all. So I'm going to hit pause while I fix this. Okay, so I fixed my lighting to follow the cans. Now we come back to render settings or render properties. Turn on ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflection, motion blur, high contrast. And for this one, I'm actually going to do multiple tests. So I'm going to do frame 1, test. Okay, that looks okay. I'm going to come to the middle. All right. Okay. And then the end right here. Cool. I'm okay with all that. I can go over to output properties. I'm not changing the background on these at all, so leave all that as is from frame 1 to frame 60. Okay. Click on this folder icon here. Create a new folder here. Scene 2. Forgot what I was naming them. Okay. some PNG and everything else stays the same. So render animation, let it do its thing. Right, and we're just basically going to repeat these steps for all the other shots. For this one in particular, I want the background to change 3 times. So I'm going to hit A. I'm going to split this up into 3 parts. 5. Sure. Okay. So I think the first 25 or 20, I'll leave one color. Yep, I'll do that. Okay. Oh, actually, before we change colors, forgot. We're going to go back to compositing, turn on use nodes. I'm going to delete these and then hit Command V to paste. Change this to shot 3. And Control Shift right click on render layers. There we go. Maybe it just takes a while for this to render out. Oh well. Okay. Back over here, I'm going to go to my render properties, turn these back on so I can actually see what they're going to look like. Before I even go changing any colors. Okay, so that's my first one. Right, so right off the bat, I feel like I can change the power of that light to be less. Maybe 500 watts and see what that looks like. Okay, much better. Sweet. So think of the render images as testing before you render out anything else. But all that is looking good. High contrast is on. Compositing is set. All right. So A to select all up to frame 25 will stay as a black backdrop. So now I'm going to come to output properties, click on this folder, click on my USB, add a new folder, scene 3. Keep forgetting the name. Okay. Accept. PNG. All right, so frame start 1 through 25. Render animation. Right, the first 25 scenes are done. So now I'm going to change this, from 26 to 50. I'm going to change this backdrop. Let's do it using shading. This up to like a bright orange. Oof. Actually going to use this one. And this is completely up to you. If you wanted to go find a hex code, right, you would just click over here and then paste it in here. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it as a basic color like that. Cool. Back to over here. 26 to 50. All right, awesome. Just because I have trust issues, I'm going to do another render image. Oh, never mind. That looks great. Okay. So render animation, frame start 26 to 50. Right, that's done. I'm going to close this out. Now we're going to start from 51 and go to 72. And change. Let's go across over here. So something like that. Output properties. Okay. Okay. Right, so that one is done too. We're going to move over to shot 4. Change the background again to black for this scene. Go into compositing, turn on use nodes, delete these. Command V to paste. Change this drop down to shot 4. Go back to layout. And back to render properties. Turn all these on here. Change the look to high contrast. I'm going to do a test image to see what it looks like. Okay, so it's looking okay. For me, I want to keep this maybe lasting a little bit longer. So I'm actually going to expand this to, let's say 90. Maybe even 95. Okay. That should be okay. This is where the text is going to be. Again, if you need to change anything, you'll do it now. But I'm pretty okay with how this is going to look. So output properties 1 through 95. Change this. PNG. Awesome. So render animation. All right, y'all. Now we've exported all 4 scenes into their individual PNG images. So if you did it right, this is what it should look like, right? Scene 1 has all of these images. Scene 2 has all of these images, so on and so forth. But newer versions of Blender do them into like an image sequence. By default, when you export like this, we are a little behind, so we have to manually do that part, which is totally fine. So I'm actually going to go into, where is it? Okay. Hit this little editor drop down here, and you are going to look for video sequencer. And I can actually close this part here. So I just left click in between here, hit join areas, and point it at the can over here. Cool. I'm going to drag the playhead all the way to 1. change this drop down to sequencer and preview. Now we're just going to hit add up at the top, image sequence, scene 1. If you're noticing that it's starting from 85, let's just go ahead and you can hit the name drop down here. Notice how it switches it. You want to make sure that you select one first or else it is going to import and play backwards. So once one's up at the top, you're going to hit A on your keyboard to select all, and then you're going to hit add image strip. Cool. So now that's added. You can make sure it plays. Perfect. And with that said, this one's playing all the way to frame, I believe it was 85. Okay, so I'm going to change that to 85 here. Okay. I'm going to go back to output. And I'm actually going to create this one called MP4s. These. So this part I'm going to let you all know that you can actually place all the image sequences here, right? So I can come back up here, do add image sequence, go back to, oops, scene 2, A to select all, add image strip, and keep going over and over until you add all of them. And you can export one long MP4. However, when we import them over to Premiere Pro, you won't have as much control with some of that editing. So if you plan on making a couple changes, like syncing stuff to music that you picked out, it's better to do one scene at a time. So keep that in mind. I'm going to do them by scene. So I'm going to change this file format now to FFmpeg video. And everything over here doesn't matter. So all of that's in here. I'm going to hit encoding. Where it says container, it's set by default to this option here. Click this drop down and select MPEG-4. All this stays the same. You're going to hit render animation. I promise you this time it's going to go 10 times faster because all the hard stuff has been done already. Okay, once that's done, close this. You can honestly delete this if you wanted to. Bring back this to frame 1, add image sequence. We're at scene 2 now. A to select all, add image strip. I believe this one went up to frame 60, really? Okay. And at frame 60, just gonna rename this 02 accept. All this is already saved, so I don't have to, but I always double check. All right, render animation. That one's done. Click on this to delete it. Move this over, add image sequence. This was scene 2, so let's go to scene 3. How long is this one? 72. Okay. Cool, that one's done. Oh, did I not rename that one? I might not have. Dang it. Okay. add, oops. Scene 4A. I'm going to rename this one for sure. This is for I believe this went up to 95. It did. Okay, so change the N to 95 up here. Everything stays the same. Cool. So now we have 4 MP4s. Actually, this one should be 3, so I can actually rename these. But before I do that, I'm going to do a file, save as, and this is going to be 14. My render stuff done. Cool. I'm going to close this because we are basically done with Blender. Rename these to Scene 1 if you don't like all these numbers, and then we're going to get into Premiere Pro in the next video.